This is Lloyd Kaufman. No need for this disclaimer. You've already paid your money. At any rate, when we first made the Toxic Avenger, no movie theater would play it. They didn't understand that this was not necessarily a horror film. It wasn't a science fiction film. They couldn't understand why people were laughing. And eventually, we got one movie theater to play the Toxic Avenger, and it ran a year, and the rest is history. The way we got the idea to make the Toxic Avenger is that Michael Herz and I, who directed the film, we directed the film together, and Michael Herz and I are sort of the Babe Ruths of co-directors. We've co-directed about 15 movies together, and I think the only other directors who've co-directed more than one movie are Pressburger and Powell, did movies like Stairway to Heaven, but the Troma movies are, of course, much better. At any rate, we saw a headline in one of the trade magazines. It may have been Variety or the Hollywood Reporter. Can't quite remember, but it said, "Horror films are dead. They no longer have a commercial value." This was around 1981. And Troma had just made a series of sexy comedies, raunchy comedies like Squeeze Play, Waitress, Stuck on You, The First Turn On. And we had discovered the raunchy comedy public. They were quite successful. Movies like Animal House came out after Squeeze Play, and slowly but surely the major studios began to make the kinds of raunchy comedies that Troma was making, only the major studios were not playing fair. They were using good scripts and good actors. So we had to move on to something else. So when we saw this headline in one of the trade papers that said horror films were dead, Michael Herz and I said, aha, that's what Troma's going to do. We're going to go into the horror area. And, unfortunately, much of Hollywood works the opposite. There'll be an article in Entertainment Weekly or something that says, "Hey, Steven Spielberg's making a movie about a guy with a fish that falls out of his ass." Then suddenly, every studio in the industry are making movies about sardines that fall out of people's asses, or porpoises that fall out of people's asses. At any rate, Troma usually does just the opposite. Troma does exactly what it's not supposed to do. We do whatever the experts say you're supposed to do. That's what we don't do, and vice versa. And so with the Toxic Avenger evolved, we wanted to do something in the horror area, but we've always liked comedy. So we wanted to try to deal with comedy, and we always felt unhappy with Frankenstein because we always wanted the monster to live. So we thought, well, why don't we have the monster in the horror film live? Why should he die all the time? And then we had the notion of the environment. I used to get these newsletters where we'd hear about toxic waste dumps all over the world ticking away like time bombs. This was in the early, like 1980, 81, 82. And there were kids in South America who'd play in the dumps, the garbage dumps, and they'd play with pixie dust. They'd throw it around, and this shiny, beautiful dust, which turned out to be radium from the hospitals, from the X-ray machines that were being thrown away in the garbage dumps. And interestingly enough, my wife, when she was a child, in Charlotte, North Carolina, they used to spray the trees with DDT, and there were these marvelous fog clouds, and she'd run around in those things, and 30 years later, she developed breast cancer. At any rate, this seemed like an interesting theme for a horror film, that the environment, and at the same time, the fact that health clubs were becoming very, very popular in the United States. Health clubs, health food. People were paying a lot of attention to their bodies. The aerobics were becoming the rage. And at the same time, of course, my wife and I would travel across the country and see these McDonald's and fast food containers strewn across the countryside and in the lakes and streams. And in those days, they weren't. I don't think they were biodegradable, so that you knew they were going to be with us for years and years. At any rate, this is sort of the evolution. This was how Michael Herz and I evolved the concept of the Toxic Avenger. The writer of the screenplay, Joe Ritter, was introduced to us through John Avildsen, who directed Rocky, on which I worked, and Ritter was an assistant cameraman, and so I had written the original story for the Toxic Avenger, and then Joe Ritter wrote a screenplay, and then the Troma team rewrote it. And the issue of hit and run driving that comes up later on here was inspired by a story in the New York Post, namely that there were these gangs driving around, and they'd run people over and score points depending on the kind of person they'd hit with the car. If they hit an old lady, they'd give themselves 2 points. If they hit a pregnant woman, they'd give themselves 6 points. So the hit and run scene that takes place in the Toxic Avenger is based entirely on genuine facts. The couple, by the way, that you've just seen having their way with each other, these two people, Jennifer Baptiste and Robert Pritchard, met on the set of the Toxic Avenger and actually got married, and they I believe have a child and are running a theater group in New York. This young man who is playing Melvin, Mark Torgel, worked for us on the First Turn On, which was one of our comedies, and he was, aside from playing Little Melvin, he was part of the Troma team and helped us write the script, and I believe Mark Torgel was the continuity person on the Toxic Avenger. The stunt, as I recall, with the bicycle was a difficult stunt to set up because the bicycle was going in one direction and the stunt and the car in another direction. So the velocity, as you know by physics, it's much more intense when there's a head-on collision than when you're hitting someone from behind. It worked out quite well. We had 5 cameras on the scene going at different speeds, and when in the editing room we were able to put together a really beautiful and touching moment. Many people have asked us, how do we do special effects? How do we do them? And with Troma, we don't have millions of dollars to create computerized special effects or the kind of things that George Lucas may do. In the scene with the young boy who is having his head squashed by the car, the full head crushing scene, we of course would prefer to use real children, but that would probably result in my having to spend what's left of my money on cigarettes for my bitch in prison. So we've used, what we do is we take a melon, the cantaloupe, probably when they're in season, only about 39 cents a pound, and we paint a happy face on the cantaloupe. We fill up the cantaloupe with cranberry sauce. It's called loading the cantaloupe. Then we put a little wig on the cantaloupe and attach some clothing to it and have the car drive over the cantaloupe. And indeed, you get quite a fine special effect of a head being crushed. Oddly enough, when the Toxic Avenger came out, the scene with the young boy getting his head crushed was not exactly well received. And I remember we had a screening for our friends and investors, and I kept warning people this was going to be a fairly intense film. And I remember one old friend of mine who had invested in one of our movies brought his 2 kids to see the movie, and I said to him, look, this really isn't for kids. He said, oh, we know horror films and we know sex. And at any rate, right around this particular scene that you're watching, the gentleman and his 2 kids stormed out, and he did not talk to me for about 3 years. Another reason that I may have dealt with a child being run over is when I was about 14 years old. We had a country place, and I remember I was learning to drive in Connecticut, and my brother and I were in the car, and I backed the car up real fast, and I heard this thud, and it was my 4-year-old sister, and I stopped the car, and she was sprawled out on the ground, but then she got up and ran in the house. But it was a pretty impressive moment. And also, once I was about 5 years old, coming back from summer camp, day camp. I was being driven back from day camp. I was about 5. And we had this Hungarian pulley, this dog that would chase cars. And it would bite, it would bit. It basically bit and chased cars. That's about all it did. And the dog chased the car. The counselor who had dropped me off drove, and the dog chased the car. And suddenly I saw this piece of what looked like a rug flapping around the rim of the wheel of the car. And it got expelled, and that, of course, was the dog. So those are my 2 personal experiences with people getting run over. The scene here with the snake was first developed probably during the caveman era, but the first time Troma did it was in the first turn-on, where we used a frog instead of a snake. Here we progressed up the food chain to a snake. You'll notice there's a rather large gal here. Troma has always had a penchant for large men and women in our movies, and also, basically, we've been inspired by Preston Sturges in large part to have mugs, to have people with interesting faces and great characters and personalities, and this was very much inspired by Preston Sturges. The Taoxic Avenger, by the way, is the first Troma movie where we called the little town Tromaville. We had pretty much been directing movies that dealt with small-town America, again inspired much by the way Preston Sturges satirized small-town America in movies like Hail the Conquering Hero. And Tromaville is sort of our version of wonderful small-town America with the fine people of Tromaville. This health club, by the way, is the St. George Health Club in New York, in Brooklyn, New York. Earlier in the film, there's a shot of a chair that has the words St. George Health Club on it. That was part of the deal. We weren't permitted to put Tromaville Health Club. In order to get the location, we had to show the name of the health club. So even though the T-shirts in the movie and other things say Tromaville Health Club, the St. George Health Club got its credit, and we're very grateful to them. Troma has always been against cigarettes and against smoking, and long before it became the American Jihad, we found that movies like Footloose, where the young hero, the PG-rated young hero, was smoking and looking real cool, we found that very, very offensive. Many people have asked us how we created the wonderful chemical toxic waste in the Taoxic Avenger. Now, in the early days, before Super Slime, one had to use something called agar-agar. And agar-agar is a seaweed-based gelatinous stuff that you have to boil. And we would basically have the basement of the Troma building as a agar-agar factory, and we were constantly boiling up this slop, which you see in the movie. I think Mark Torgel was one of the greatest Troma actors we've ever had the privilege to use here playing Little Melvin. And when we made the Taoxic Avenger Part 2 and the Taoxic Avenger Part 3, the sequels, we wrote a part for Little Melvin in the Taoxic Avenger Part 3, where the Taoxic Avenger is transformed by the devil into his former 90-pound nerd self. But I think Mark wanted an extra $50, and I was too cheap to give it to him, and I I regret that. We used another person who was okay, but he was no Mark Torgel. I knew Mark Torgel, and the person in Toxic Avenger Part 3 was no Mark Torgel.
Do it, Melvin, do it.
Cindy Mannion is a perfect example. Cindy is the person on the right as opposed to the person on the left here. Cindy Mannion is a perfect example of a Troma actress, or actor person as we call them. She gave all her body, soul, mind to the making of the Toxic Avenger. One of the reasons that Troma has survived for 25 years is that we call ourselves the Troma team. Everybody, the crew, the pizza man, the actors, the writer, everybody devotes him or herself entirely to the movie. And while we were making the Toxic Avenger, that movie was the most important thing in the life of Cindy Mannion. And she is clearly one of the reasons that this movie became such an energetic success that it was. Also, she made the crew very, very happy with the scene that you were about to see, and made the hardship of making a Troma movie much more bearable. We used the same locker room for 3 or 4 different scenes during the movie. What we would do would be we would put different props in it, have different art direction, so that the locker room looked different each time you saw it, and you assumed it was a different locker room. Many people believe that we forgot to take the lens cap off of this scene. And when we showed this movie in the movie theater, very often patrons would look back toward the projector to wonder if the projector bulb hadn't blown out. But obviously it was intended that this be a darkened pool, a darkened swimming pool. But clearly this technique of blackout was not terribly effective. This kissing, by the way, of Mark Torgel and the sheep, he was supposed to soul kiss the sheep. And I was very, very upset when he kept kind of pretending to kiss the sheep and not actually kissing the sheep. But apparently when the lights came on, Mark told me that I found this out later, that the sheep was infested with all sorts of fleas and insects and ticks and lice. That it was almost as disgusting as the lunch we served the crew that day. I think that the remote control clicker was probably created for this very scene, because we have read that in one of Marissa Tomei's interviews that she is in this movie. Here's a scene that was interesting because just before the guy jumped, we remembered that he wasn't the stuntman, was not wearing the tutu, and we had to call him back before he jumped, just before he smashed through the windows, and everybody was very upset about that because all of the adrenaline was going, and but we had to. One of the few times where Troma felt that continuity was slightly important. The scene with Melvin on the ground, starting to bubble up and burn, and bubbling and oozing. Mark Torgel had been through all sorts of other horrendous scenes where he's transforming into the Toxic Avenger, and his head is... He went through hell. He went through weeks and weeks of hell. But on this very, very scene, I remember suddenly in the middle of this scene, he looked up at me and said something about, I'm being... I feel exploited. I feel exploited. And I remember that I said, okay, that's it, stop for the day, and we stopped filming. But I always found it amusing because he had been through so many horrendous scenes prior to that, and it was a moment that I will not long forget. An interesting note, when we first released this movie, when Troma first released this movie, the MPAA, which is the rating board, had a policy, at least with Troma and independent movie companies, you could not show burning men or women and get an R rating. So all sorts of things were cut out of the Toxic Avenger, including the shot of the burning man, and just about every special effect we had, just about every punch and every bullet, and so that the movie was quite disemboweled when it came out initially. three-budget live-action Toxic Avenger movies had theatrical releases in the U.S., Europe, and Asia, including runs of about 1 year in cities like New York, 120 prints in Japan by a major studio called Shojuku, major releases in Germany, about 250,000 rental video cassettes were sold in the United States through Vestron, Warner Brothers, Live, for the three Toxic Avenger movies that came out. Toxic Avenger is a movie that, as I mentioned, originally no movie theater would show, and it ended up being the basis of a children's cartoon series called The Toxic Crusaders, which ran on Saturday mornings. The Toxic Crusaders, for the 2 or 3 years they were showing, played in about 96% of the U.S. TV markets, as well as most of the world. And there were about 100 companies that were licensing Toxic Crusader merchandise, action figures, Topps trading cards, Nintendo, Sega, Colorforms, International Games, CD-ROMs, model kits, all that kind of stuff. And once again, here's a movie that was deemed so outrageous when it came out, so full of sex and violence, that it was only natural that it would become a children's cartoon show, so proving that the movie industry is one of the most unusual in the world. I remember when we shot this scene, this was in a little alley in New York City called Shinbone Alley. It's supposed to be Tromaville, of course. That basically everything you see, all this garbage, was pretty much in the alley, and also there was some high grass growing in the alley. And I remember that it was summertime, and we all got chiggers, which are little insects that burrow under your skin and drive you nuts. And the only way to get rid of them is by using nail polish remover.
We brought you a little present from the boss. Here.
The Three Stooges have always been a great inspiration to Michael Herz and me. And I think in this scene that is coming up, where the Toxic Avenger dispatches these unusual villains, you can see the influence of the Three Stooges. Again, the special effects and stunts here are quite good in terms of reality, but in terms of finding simple ways to do the special effects.
Come on now, come on.
The guy who played the policeman was an actual fireman. In real life, he was a fireman. We've always had an interest in the underdog, and again, I think we were a bit ahead of our time with the transvestite Three Stooges victim. We went on to help produce a movie called Vegas in Space, which was the first space travel musical with an all transvestite cast. Michael Herz and I did not direct it.
Blow his nose off or what?
Boss says if he doesn't want to cooperate, we should make love to him.
When we were shooting this alley scene, there was a vagrant or a homeless person, a drunken, drugged-out, disgusting person who lived in this Shinbone Alley and was constantly harassing us and very upset that we were using this beautiful sleeping grounds for our movie. The scene that you're going to see where Toxy pokes the eyes out of in Three Stooges fashion. One of the tricks we've learned over the years is that if you pretend to poke somebody's eyes out and your fingers get too close to the eyes, you may actually poke out the eyes. So what we do is we turn the camera upside down and play the action backwards, so that we can put somebody's fingers right up against the person's eyeballs and pull away from the eyeballs. And when the camera is upside down, after the film is processed, we then turn the film front to back, which means that the action will then be upside down and backward, which means that the fingers will actually be going toward the eyeballs. The tutu that Toxy wears was inspired by the fact that Troma has done a lot of work with Jacques d'Amboise, the great Balanchine dancer with the New York City Ballet. He has an organization called the National Dance Institute, which teaches young kids to dance the ballet style, and is a sort of a melting pot for kids of all classes and varieties to learn ballet and learn dance and look at dance as a form of athletics. And Troma has, on a pro bono basis, made a number of documentaries for Jacques d'Amboise's National Dance Institute. So that's how the tutu came into my head. There's another example of the Troma Special Effects Department. The mop, of course, is a symbol of cleaning up, and the notion that the environment is important it carries through with Toxy's weapon. He literally cleans up crime with his mop, and he also, I remember thinking it was very amusing that with all the high-tech weapons that one sees in movies for our hideously deformed creature of superhuman size and strength, to be dealing with this mop would be kind of the yin and the yang of the movie industry, that it was so simple and so mundane and benign. A mop is not thought of as something that goes down people's throats, that it would be very effective when used. We have 3 rules of production at Troma. 3 rules of production are safety to people's bodies, safety to human beings, that is, safety to people's property, and, in much smaller print, make a good movie. And whenever we're on a set, we post these rules. We have them in our office. We have them on everybody's script. We put the big posters of the 3 rules of production on the trucks with equipment, especially when we're doing stunts. That's one area where we do not try to save money. Those spinning shots of the newspapers were done with a cheese tray that revolves. I'm sure you've all had cheese on a sort of a Lazy Susan kind of a tray, and we would put the newspapers on that and just spin it and film it. And that's why you never see the newspapers stop spinning.
Most gruesome sight I have ever seen. Gruesome, huh? Have you ever met my mother-in-law? Now that's gruesome.
Pat Ryan, the big fat mayor, he kind of reprised his role as an evil member of the power elite in the class of Newcomb High. He was probably the most accomplished actor in the Toxic Avenger cast and was especially adept at changing terrible dialogue into something not quite as terrible. He would, with my and Michael Herz's blessings, change all of his lines. Although Pat went on to star in a film whose director we at Tromaville hate more than just about any other. I won't condescend to say the film's title, but I'll let you know its initials are ST and it rhymes with Reek Rash. I have to say he was a great guy to work with. Pat was terrific. Many of the slasher films of the early 80s had a sense of humor about their gore, but none of them had taken it to its logical extreme and turned it into slapstick. The amount of blood in Toxic Avenger was ludicrous, and knowingly so. It was like a live-action cartoon, sort of violence as good, clean fun. You know? Now, I believe that I did this handheld photography, if I remember correctly. And if you look at that shadow, you will see that it's clearly, it's supposed to be this Elephant Man thing, but instead it's you could see that it was the Arriflex camera with a matte box. The way Troma makes movies is we have a very, very long pre-production. We rehearse in our offices, and then we go to the locations, and we rehearse on location, and we videotape the rehearsals. And we keep improvising, and we change the script, and we change the characterization, and then by the time we get to the set for the real filming, we're pretty well prepared, and we throw everything away and start again, so that our Troma movies, while they're well prepared and rather entertaining, they have a certain spontaneity to them, because we're constantly changing things up until the film actually goes through the camera. Toxy's home here in the toxic waste dump. Toxy's home was built in an abandoned hospital in Jersey City. There was a Jersey City hospital which had just floors and floors of empty rooms, and we built the dump there. And Barry Shapiro, the art director, spent weeks in pre-production creating the wonderful interior of the dump. I always got a kick out of these signs, which talk about the fact that that waste dump is a national recreation area or national wilderness preserve, and indeed, to some extent, there are situations right now where we've got a big tennis stadium that just got built for the elite of New York, and the U.S. Open and 25 acres of beautiful parklands have been converted to the use of the power elite. People have asked about the Troma movies, and is there a Troma politic? And they have pointed out that there seem to be recurring themes in the 25 years of Troma movies, where there always seems to be the little people of Tromaville who are exploited by a certain elite, and then one way or the other they rise up and throw off the power elite. And indeed, there was a great book that I read when I was a kid called The Power Elite, written by C. Wright Mills I believe in the early 60s or late 50s, which basically talks about the military-industrial complexes, the elites of the military-industrial complex controlling American society. And in our movies, we believe that it's a conspiracy of the labor, the bureaucratic, and the corporate elite that conspire together to control the hearts and minds of the little people of Tromaville and suck dry both their economic and spiritual capital. And this is sort of the theme of many of our movies, and indeed in the Taoxic Avenger, it is Toxy who liberates the little people of Tromaville and throws off the yoke of this power elite that is stomping on them. What's interesting about this guy who has his arm ripped off is, A, he was an IRS agent, Internal Revenue agent, and B, we, since we had to rip his arm off, we figured, well, let's get a guy who only has one arm, which is what we did. We combed the countryside to find a guy who only had one arm, who was willing to be in a Troma movie and indeed play a part where his arm is supposed to be ripped off. Where we screwed up was that instead of ripping off the fake arm and showing the guy's real stump, our special effects department went overboard, and they created a phony plastic stump from which they hung pieces of spaghetti and wet not blood stain, but wet vegetable dyed toilet paper to create an artificial stump. So we really did not need to have a guy with his who literally was missing his arm. And unfortunately, he had been rigged up with a fake stump, was put on his real stump. And by the time I discovered it, it was too late. It would have taken a long time to unrig him. So we went with it. And it still works pretty well.
We'll give you our money if you want money.
The little baby who with the mother, the guy who's got the painted face, he quit after that scene. He said it was so disturbing to point a rifle at a little baby that he quit. Now the baby whose mother was there, and the mother's in the film, the mother worked for us, and that was her baby. She didn't mind. But the actor was extremely upset by it and sort of traumatized and quit.
Check out this pretty little. And this got a dog.
In the Toxic Avenger, you have children getting their heads squashed. You have men having their arms ripped off. You have customers at the fast food taco place getting blown away. We did not receive any hate mail for any of the murders, head crushings, hit and runs. However, we did receive some hate mail for killing the dog. The way we killed the dog, by the way, was the man who owned the dog had a trick that the dog could do. He could throw the dog. So he would throw the dog, and the dog loved it. The dog could do that all day. And then we got a small piece of rug, which I think if you look at it, it's kind of a gray piece of rug, doesn't even match the dog. And we squibbed it. Squib is a small explosive with a blood package in it. And we did a close-up of the little piece of rug, and somehow that upset people. At one point during the scene, Toxy was to take a chair and smash it over one of the actors and break the chair. And one of our fine crew handed Toxy a real chair instead of a stunt chair. And the actor got smashed with a real chair rather than a stunt chair. Everybody thought that was very amusing except for the actor. For some reason, people got turned off by this scene. I can't imagine why. You will notice that you do not see the Toxic Avenger's face. Part of our strategy in making this film was not to reveal his face until later in the film. So we were trying to keep the audience guessing as to what would the Toxic Avenger look like. The fellow who played the Toxic Avenger, Mitch Cohen, did a wonderful job. He'd have to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning every morning, and he and Jennifer Aspinall would work on his makeup. And again, in those days, the appliances, the makeup appliances, special effects makeup, were not as well developed as they are today, and they had to be put on in pieces. The Toxic Avenger Part 1, his face is all different pieces, and it literally took 4 hours every morning. And Mitch Cohen was unable to eat. He'd have to drink through a straw, and for 20 hours during the day, he'd be basically drinking malteds, and he was an amazingly dedicated and loyal actor. For the Toxic Avenger Parts 2 and Part 3, we created a mask where it was in one piece and could be taken on and off the actor's head at any time, and it has an eye in it that is remote control, so the eye can move. Regarding most of the deaths in Troma movies, most of the murder and most of the violence in Troma movies, we try to use rather benign things. Whipped cream. One does not normally think of whipped cream as an agent of death. One does not normally think of a milkshake as killing people. Hitchcock actually would do things in the same way, and he inspired us in a large part. We just took our violence a little bit further. But he would place his Hitchcockian venues for violence in peaceful little towns like Bodega Bay and places where you would not think that there could be terrible, terrible violence. This shot of the French fries, I remember that the cutaway to it, we never shot a cutaway of the actual hands in the French fries, but we did do some documentary footage to set up the fast food restaurant, And that close-up of the French fries boiling was, in fact, the hands are not in the French fry. The hands are not in the oil. It's just the oil boiling. But by the magic of editing, you think the hands are in are boiling, but it's purely the suggestion. It's quite interesting. The fact that the monster is the good guy and that the monster only kills bad people was a throwback to a script that I wrote with Stan Lee, the head of Marvel, the creator of Spider-Man and many other Marvel characters. Stan and I wrote a script in 1971 called Night of the Witch, and about a witch who only killed bad people. She was a modern-day witch in modern-day Salem, and she would only kill the weapons manufacturer and the evil business people and the evil labor and bureaucratic elite. As I mentioned, the only hate mail we ever got about the Toxic Avenger was about the scene with the killing of the dog. The dog that we used to play dead and look like it had been shot was trained to lay on the ground, and we poured liquid with red food coloring and put bits of toilet paper and spaghetti that were colored with the red food dye, and created a pretty gruesome looking scene, all for about 29 cents. When we were casting the Toxic Avenger, we had many actresses. Troma is famous for giving opportunities to new young talent, and Troma, because it has emerged as a sort of a brand name, whenever we cast a movie, there usually people are lined up down the street to get parts, because the Troma movie opens up a lot of doors in the established movie industry. If you see Sizzle Beach USA, which is a Troma film, you see that's the first performance of Kevin Costner in the starring role. Vincent D'Onofrio is in the first Turn On. At any rate, there are a lot of well-known people who've begun in low-budget movies, specifically Troma movies. But the best actress we found for Sarah, the girlfriend of the Toxic Avenger, was Andre Miranda, who happened to be the significant other of our investor, and she was a singer and composer. The opening credit song in the Toxic Avenger was written by Andre, and also she had a certain quality that indeed was the best. She just stood out and was so good. In fact, she was so good that we rewrote her part because she refused to do nudity, and we rewrote her part so that she did not have to do any nudity, and we're really glad that we made that decision. Also, it's interesting with Troma movies, our leading ladies tend to be musicians. Phoebe Legere, who became Toxy's significant other in the Toxic Avenger Part 2 and Part 3, is also a chanteuse and musical genius. And Jane Jensen, who plays Juliet in Romeo and Juliet, is a rock and roll star, and so it's an interesting trend in Troma movies.
Oops. Sorry.
We tried to give Toxy a certain compassion. Critics have said that Troma has done to the cinema superhero of the 80s and 90s what Marvel Comics did to the superhero of the comic books, namely put a new face on these superheroes, in the same way that Spider-Man has to conquer his problems at school and take care of his aunt, and Toxy has to pay the rent. Toxy's got to be true to his mother and take care of his mother, that is, and be true to his girlfriend. And Toxy's got skin problems. Conquering these problems really is what makes him a superhero, more than shoving mops down people's throats or jumping high or whatever superpowers Toxy has. You'll notice, by the way, with the T-shirts where it says Monster Hero, the monster hero. It doesn't say the Toxic Avenger. This is because we did not have the name Toxic Avenger until after we made the movie. We did not come up with the name of the Toxic Avenger until the movie was completed. Here we are back in our locker room, the same locker room. It just looks like a different locker room. We've propped it slightly different. This gentleman who was about to have his head crushed, he was the film commissioner of Jersey City. He was the person who was the liaison between the Troma team and Jersey City. And it was thanks to this fellow here, whose stomach you see, that we got to film in Jersey City. That big sandwich, that it was indeed a free sandwich. The delicatessen that provided it would give us lunch in return for a credit. And this sandwich did not go to waste. What Pat Ryan did not eat, the crew got to eat and was very happy to get it. And it got to be used in the film. This is valuable information for those of you who want to make your own movies. Everything should be used and reused, and nothing is wasted. Very politically correct. Recycling. We really knew when, after the Rocky and after Michael Hers and I started going to a gym, we knew that those wonderful gadgets and machines in the gym could make some really cool, groovy violence. And indeed, this particular gym did not fail us. You can see the Troma style of acting, too, with the giant D.W. Griffith type Lillian Gish expressions, even though this is a sound movie and doesn't quite require it, but we like it. This is actually a more weighty head crush scene than the scene with the car. Interestingly enough, the mop was later, years later, the New York police force would use a toilet plunger in a violent manner, sticking it up an alleged misdemeanor person's butt. This scene in the sauna bath became a rather controversial scene, and people still ask me about this scene and how we came up with the idea, and God knows, but to this day people find it quite stimulating that this young woman is looking at the Polaroid shots of a full head-crushing scene while she is pleasuring herself. And it has since been determined that 9 out of 10 people who masturbate use Troma movies in their masturbation fantasies. One of the points that I was always sorry about in the movie theaters is people very often missed the sign. They were so involved in what Jennifer Baptiste is doing here that they missed this funny joke about people with inflamed eyes, nasal and ear discharges, and they didn't laugh, and I thought it was extremely hilarious.
Listen, asshole, how many times are you gonna pull that Elephant Man joke?
This is the first time that we showed the Toxic Avenger's face. And when we shot the scene, we didn't, unfortunately, we did not shoot the close-up. Somehow I forgot to shoot the close-up of Toxic Avenger's face. And as I recall, we had to get the close-up in the post-production stage. We just went and shot it and cut it in, and luckily it works again through the magic of suggestion.
This monster may have developed a very basic instinct to destroy evil.
Hey, you, in the alley. Hey, knucklehead. How about some nice
This edit from the steam of Wanda's behindy on the steam on the hot rocks. This edit where we cut to the toxic urination, I think, is one of the best cuts in the film. One of the best editing moments during the Toxic Avenger. Also, the urination scene was something we had to improvise on the set. And the only one who was hung like a baguette, the only one who was hung big enough to actually pee such a mighty stream was, of course, me. That limousine, by the way, that we found was somebody's limousine that we just flagged down in the street, and in exchange for the glamour of being able to watch some toxic urination, we let the driver watch the toxic urination scene. We got to use that beautiful limousine all night, and the guy had the pleasure of staying up till about 6 in the morning for something that he thought he would be finished with in about 10 minutes. And he got to have his limousine crapped up by all these ugly men.
And you can tell all your scum friends that things are going to change in this town. I'm not just another pretty face.
What makes Toxy so appealing as a character, I think, in retrospect, again, it's I majored in Chinese studies at Yale University, and Taoism, which is a dualistic view of the universe, the yin and the yang, where good and evil are always together, or pain and pleasure. The oyster gets a piece of sand stuck in its asshole and it creates this magnificent pearl. The yin and the yang. Toxy's got a dual nature. First, he's totally innocent, and yet he tears people's heads off. He's a good guy who only attacks evil, yet he does so in gratuitously horrifying ways. Toxy's tenderness, of course, comes out of his relationship to his mother and girlfriend and the children and little people of Tromaville. Times this may seem silly or trite in the movies, but the Troma team and Michael and I are really sincere about Toxy's warmer side. Very similar to this, Toxy is both sort of a feminine side, the bone-crushing side, and the masculine side, his protective, mothering side. The fact that a woman special effects artist originally designed him, and another woman co-wrote the scripts to the sequels, probably enhanced Toxy's Chaplinesque qualities. Also, Toxy is a combination of both fantasy fulfillment and nightmare. A member of his audience can both wish him to be, as well as be utterly afraid that they are perhaps like him. He's a muscular symbol of power, something desirable. Simultaneously, he's an outsider, something ugly and unwanted. In the outsider quality, though, I think we find Toxy's core. No matter how much attention he's given, he'll never really belong. He's sort of like Troma's place in the entertainment industry. We're never going to be part of the environment. We're never going to be part of the establishment. And whether or not we admit it, I think many people in the audience feel exactly the same way as Toxy.
Almost all the criminals. He hasn't gotten us. Yet.
Well, what the hell are we going to do about this monster, huh?
I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to kill him. Because if we don't kill him...
This scene where these gangsters, Toxy, was inspired by the great silent film director and comedian Max Linder, a French filmmaker from the silent film days. And Max Linder's scene had men with swords surrounding the hero, who would drop on the ground, and then the men surrounding the hero would stick their swords into each other, instead of this one where they shoot each other. Toxy, again, only has a couple of superpowers. He's able to jump, and he's pretty strong. But other than that, he really doesn't have much in the way of superpowers. So what makes him a real hero, what makes him a superhero, is that he is conquering his, paying the rent and taking care of his mother and being able to live in Tromaville. The fellow who's on the right with the stick, the blind person's cane, is the actor who played the chief villain in the Toxic Avenger Part 2. He played the devil. We always wanted Toxy to have sort of a Chaplinesque quality about him. And clearly this scene was very much inspired by City Lights. In the third Toxic Avenger movie, when Toxy's significant other gets her sight back briefly, the Chaplin reference is even stronger. This lovemaking scene, of course, Toxy's got his tutu on and his leotards, and this fact that two people are making love with clothing on was way ahead of its time, and Milos Forman used the same technique when he had Courtney Love doing a striptease act with all her clothes on in the Larry Flint movie. These eggs were cooked about a week before we were to shoot. We were supposed to shoot the scene a week before these, and we actually did, and poor Mitch Cohen had to eat them. The dump, the exterior of the dump, was in Jersey City, New Jersey. And indeed, there was a dump with big oil drums, and we were permitted to film in it. We never knew what was in them, but someday we may find out if we grow a third ear or something. I remember when we were shooting a lot of these scenes that I wanted to show Toxy as a caring and loving and rather human person. Some of the crew members found them really stupid, and but I think in the fullness of time, those scenes, aside from being rather amusing, they give Toxy the dimension that makes him what he is today, and many people like Toxy, and usually men go to see horror, science fiction, and action pictures, and with the Toxic Avenger, we would get couples, because women like him. He's romantic, and he's true to his girlfriend, and he takes care of his mother, and has a great body. So as a result, when the movie played in the movie theaters, we wouldn't just get young men, we would get couples.
Sorry, madam.
This chase scene through the basement of what's supposed to be the locker room was a part of the abandoned hospital in Jersey City, and we basically used this abandoned hospital in Jersey City as a studio. We were able to shoot a good deal of the movie in one location, so we didn't have to move. That elevator does not work. It was we lit it, and the door, we were able to push the door open manually. One of the problems we had with these rats is that we bought them in a pet store, and we had to dye them. We spray painted them with the hairspray. We used a hairspray, washable hairspray, and the rats are so clean that we'd spray them and they'd immediately have washed themselves off. And finally, we were able to get them to sit still for a minute and without licking off the hairspray. There's an interesting aspect to this particular scene in that the script, as originally written, she was not supposed to die. She was supposed to live. And if you stay tuned till the end of this, after the end of the film, you'll see how this gal was supposed to have survived. When we edited the movie, we decided we would suggest that Toxy killed her. But instead, in fact, you will see how she was really supposed to end up when you see these lost scenes that are being placed after the movie is over. I referred earlier to the fact that it is our belief that the MPAA CARA rating board, which determines how films are rated, is unfair to independent movie companies. Now, this scene is a perfect example. When this woman gets punched, that was a scene that we were cut out, that we were forced to cut in order to get an R rating. And in those days, as I mentioned, in order to get into movie theaters, you had to have an R rating. So as a result, the punch, when this old lady gets punched, that had to be cut out of the movie in order to get an R rating. And it's clear, obviously, all of this was cut to get an R rating, and I do not believe that major Hollywood movies had to cut anything approaching this. So one of the reasons so few independent movie studios survive is that, in our opinion, the MPAA has forced them to disembowel their movies, or they could not get into the movie theaters. Now, of course, many movies can just go right to video or television, so that getting an acceptable rating is not as important as it used to be. Road Warrior was a very big inspiration on the Taoxic Avenger. This car chase scene, Michael Hers and I had never directed anything like this. Our movies prior to this had been raunchy comedies with slapstick and sexy stuff, and we had not ever filmed any kind of action like a car chase or any of that sort of stuff. And we studied Road Warrior very closely. I remember Jimmy London and I, my co-director of photography. I was director of photography on the first half of Toxic Avenger, and Jimmy London came on around the time of the time we were filming in the fast food restaurant, and he became the director of photography. Prior to the Toxic Avenger, I was director of photography on all the Troma in-house movies that Michael Hers and I directed. And we studied George Miller's Road Warrior movie, and the big scene on the trucks where there's a chase scene and people are attached to trucks and fighting on the moving trucks. And we broke it down shot by shot and tried to imitate various scenes that were done to give the illusion of moving cars. Many of these scenes, when you see Bozo and Toxy in the car together, close up, the car is actually parked, and we have people jiggling the car, and the car is not moving. We have all of the dialogue was done in a stationary car while the car is being jiggled up and down, and we shot lots of close-ups of hands on wheels and feet on accelerators. We also attached cameras to the sides of the cars, and we're able to use point of view for crashes and things of that nature. Perhaps the most horrifying film experience that Michael Hers and I ever had involved the scene where this car flips over and falls on its back, turns upside down. And when we hired the stunt people for that, we hired professionals with Hollywood credits. And I remember, Michael and I did not spare any expense when it came to the safety of the stunt. In order for the car to go up the ramp and tip over onto its back, it had to be reinforced with a roll bar so that the driver, who was to drive up over the ramp and tip over, he wouldn't get crushed when the car fell on its roof. Unfortunately, the person who was hired to build the roll bar attached the roll bar to the floor of the car, and when the car flipped over on its roof, the roll bar went right through the floor of the car. Rather than bolt the roll bar to the chassis of the car the way it was supposed to, he just screwed it into the floor of the car. So when the car tipped over, it collapsed like an accordion, and the guy was inside of it, and Michael and I thought he was dead. And we remember running over to the car after the shot, and there was silence, and we looked at each other, and we figured this was it. You know, if we had killed somebody, if someone had died on our set, we never would have made another movie again. And then we heard like we heard a little, and we had to call in the jaws of life to cut him out of the car, but the stuntman Russell was okay, and everything was fine. Luckily, the part of the car that collapsed like the accordion was on the passenger side and not on the driver's side. However, whenever anybody calls me about the fellow who we hired to prepare the car for the stunt, I always make sure that I tell that story. And I've never ever badmouthed anybody who has worked for us because I don't want anyone to have bread taken out of his or her mouth. But in the case of this person, someone's life could have been taken away. So I have no problem in bad-mouthing him. Norma Pratt, the small person in this film, played the mother-in-law in Stuck on You, which was our raunchy comedy about palimony. And she was so happy because she said that it was the first time she had a part where she wasn't treated like a midget. She played a part in Stuck on You where she was the mother-in-law. And as a result, she was so happy to come back for the Toxic Avenger. However, after she had to do the scene with the pants that had the jism on it, and then she was shoved into a dryer, and then she was put on the ironing board and had her face ironed, she stopped returning our calls soon thereafter. You'll notice the Troma style of acting. That man who just screamed, that is the way, there are two types of Troma acting. There's the overacting, and then there's the overacting. You'll see, in a moment, you'll see a major political statement when Toxy's feet are going through the toxic waste dump. You see first a McDonald's and a non-biodegradable McDonald's container, and then something even more polluting, namely 6 Crises by Richard M. Nixon. And this sort of, in that one shot, summed up the entire theme of the movie.
Who's there? Who is that?
Toxy, as a hideously deformed creature of superhuman size and strength, has an instinctive antipathy to bad people. And during the course of the movie, we wanted to keep the audience guessing as to whether or not he was going to kill Sarah. So, but by the end of the film, you find out that he cannot control himself. He has traumatons which have a chemical reaction with evil. So even though he may not want to kill the little old lady, because she is evil, his traumatons in his body have a chemical reaction and kill her. And we didn't want to really give away what Toxy's thing was, so that we would keep a little suspense going about whether or not he might actually kill Sarah. Another interesting note that I recall is that Mitch Cohen's voice was a very nice voice. The actor who plays Toxy had a great voice, but it was kind of a normal young man's voice. And we thought it would be funny if the monster, when he did speak for the first time, that he came out with this very deep, authoritative, almost professorial voice, deep from the diaphragm. And indeed, the first time we showed the movie and to a paying audience, and the Toxic Avenger speaks for the first time, there was a huge laugh because his voice was so unexpectedly mellifluous.
We gotta cover this up. If it ever gets out to the press, we're sunk. And I want you to do me a favor. Kill that bastard for me. You gotta kill him.
Another influence that created the Toxic Avenger idea was the Silent Spring, which was a book by Rachel Carson in 1962. Silent Spring was a bestseller that warned about how the persistent use of pesticides could bring danger to humans and wildlife. And I remember reading it for extra credit in high school, and it made a profound effect on me. Also, the movie Mondo Cane. The Mondo Cane was the first and best of the Mondo films, which were documentaries. I think they may have been faked at times, reveling in the more unusual aspects of the Earth, the planet we live in, rather. And Mondo Cane meaning Dog's World. I remember there were some little frogs or fish in an area where nuclear testing was going on, and the frogs had mutated, or the fish, I think they were actually fish, the fish had mutated and were taken to living in trees. I hadn't thought about this movie until we started organizing the Toxic Avenger movie. Another thing about Toxic Avenger is, as I mentioned, the title didn't come until well after the movie was shot, and we originally were calling it Health Club Horror, or Health Club. The police station used in the following scene was a real vacant, but a real police cell and station that was attached to a working police station. And one of the ways we got permission to film there was the policemen would be in the movie. So many of the policemen you see in this scene are from the movie. The other thing that's sort of interesting is that you'll notice that the real policemen have uniforms and hats that fit, but our actors, for some reason, the hats were always too small, and I think we saved some money because we were using police hats from children's costumes. And you'll notice that whenever you see the Troma actor is in a police hat, the hat is invariably much too tiny. In the scene here with the policeman, my own daughter, Lily Hayes, is the small child eating a chocolate ice cream cone. These children were primarily kids who lived in Jersey City. We tend to use a lot of our friends and associates in the films. The people who work for Troma are in the films. We never called the Toxic Avenger Toxy until part 2. My brother said one day to me, my brother Charles Kaufman, who directed and wrote and produced Mother's Day and When Nature Calls and Jakarta, my brother said, you ought to give Toxy a nickname. Give the Toxic Avenger a nickname. In part 2, we called the Toxic Avenger Toxy. Also, the title, The Toxic Avenger, never occurred to us until post-production, when we kept mulling over, what are we going to call this movie? We were thinking of Health Club Horror, Health Club Monster, and then the word toxic, there was something about toxic shock, or toxic, or we were thinking of toxic shock. And then the way we got the title was Walter Manley, who produced The Green Slime many years ago and had been a foreign sales agent for us, for Troma, for many years. Walter Manley said that we should use the word Avenger. So we came up with the Toxic Avenger. And Walter Manley introduced the Toxic Avenger to the world at the Cannes Film Festival in 1984. And, of course, when we showed the Toxic Avenger at Cannes, people did not understand it. The only sale we made at Cannes was to a French company. So it was interesting that the Toxic Avenger was first discovered by the French and played in French movie theaters long before the Toxic Avenger played in American movie theaters.
Well, I was thinking the very same thing. Yes, capture would be fine. Aha. Well, thank you, Governor. Talk to you soon. Goodbye, sir.
Somehow we convinced the army base in, this was Staten Island. There was some kind of an army base in Staten Island, part of New York City, to be part of our movie. And they let us film their deployment, their drill with these tanks and weapons and vehicles. And then somehow, I don't recall how, but somehow we got them to let us use the tank and their soldiers, some of their soldiers in the movie. And this climactic scene with the tank and the people of Tromaville was filmed on some sort of a military installation in Staten Island. I know we did not go through any of the normal procedure when one films with the armed forces. Usually you have to get all sorts of papers signed, and Washington, D.C. is involved and all that kind of stuff. And yet somehow we got it done. I remember that at one point the person who was in charge of this military installation or camp or whatever it is was somewhat shocked and puzzled by the fact that Andre Miranda was walking around in a very tiny bikini, and but nonetheless let us continue filming, and we explained, and his men backed us up that it was very good, that the film was a very good morale booster for the recruits, or the soldiers. All of the people in this scene, obviously the soldiers were soldiers who were a reserve or part of this installation, and the local people were gotten by putting up notices weeks in advance of shooting. We would put up notices, "Be in a movie, you can be in a movie," and of course people would sign up, and we were lucky enough to be able to keep them long enough to shoot the scene. After about 15 minutes of baking in the hot sun and waiting, people found out that acting in a movie is kind of boring. I think I'll go home and have a bologna sandwich. But so we would shoot the wide shots first, and then as the crowd got smaller and smaller, we'd shoot the close-ups, and the crowd eventually would diminish to about 3 people, and we'd be even on the extreme close-ups. Many of the actors who started out in the film disappeared along the way. We tried to bring as many of them back as we could for this final scene, but you will notice that not all of them are there. After we finished shooting the Toxic Avenger, we during the editing period, we went back and decided that we would shoot more footage for the ending. We did not originally film the Mayor Grody, getting his guts ripped out by the Toxic Avenger. Originally, we wanted to have a quicker ending and just have Toxy make him give up and win the day. But in the editing room, we realized that we ought to end the film on a nice violent note. So we wanted to go back and shoot some cutaways to Toxy's fist punching the mayor in the stomach and pulling out his guts. Unfortunately, Pat Ryan, the Mayor Grody, had some kind of a fat operation where he had a good deal of fat removed. So you'll notice that he didn't match with the original Pat Ryan, but also we couldn't get Mitch Cohen back, and we used a kid who worked in our office. So when you see the close-ups of his legs walking, you'll see that there's a considerably skinnier legged Toxy. So the skinny leg Toxy and the skinnier Pat Ryan, the skinnier Mayor Grody, matched due to provenance. But all of the fist and pulling out the guts was shot during the editing period, and you can see the hand, the close-up of the hand ripping out the guts. If you look closely, you'll see that Pat Ryan's is much thinner in some of these scenes than he was in the actual movie. The fact that we had Pat Ryan try to put the guts back into his stomach was very much appreciated by the audiences at the end of the film, and oftentimes there would be spontaneous applause. The end of this movie was where Toxy and Sarah are yelling for each other, was very much inspired by Rocky. I had the privilege of working for John Avildsen on the first Rocky, and obviously this scene at the end is a tribute to that, where Rocky is yelling, "Yo, Adrian, Adrian, Adrian," during at the end of the big boxing match. We never really expected a sequel. This was never in the plan. But by accident, the end of the original Toxic Avenger sets up the sequel pretty well. The final voiceover set it up very, very well.
The Toxic Avenger will be there.
Well, it's Lloyd Kaufman. I hope you've enjoyed the director's cut DVD of the Toxic Avenger. It's the 15th anniversary celebration, and if you want to keep celebrating, why don't you navigate over to the scenes that we had to cut out. These were lost scenes that we haven't been able to find them, and they reappeared magically in the Troma basement. Navigate over and look at those lost scenes from the Toxic Avenger, scenes that never got into the original director's cut of the Toxic Avenger. And again, thank you very much, all the fans who have kept Tromaville alive these nigh 25 years.